Hey, this is Cold Turkey, and today we're going to be talking about Doctor Who. This is part 6 of my 9-part commentary series on Doctor Who, and specifically, we're going to be talking about the Fifth Doctor. So the Fifth Doctor went from January 1982 to March 1984. He was portrayed by Peter Davison, and seasons 19, 20, and 21. So who was the Fifth Doctor? Well, the Fifth Doctor kind of had this cricket outfit. He was very much a kinder, more gentler Doctor than some of the Doctors in the past. Now, this is not to say that he wasn't willing to do things to get the job done. Like most Doctors in the past, when push comes to shove, he was willing to take lives of people or creatures that threatened other societies or things like that. So he was definitely willing to get the job done, which is a trait that a lot of the Doctors have had in the past. They try to seek a diplomatic solution first, but often when pushed or shoved away from that, more drastic measures have to be taken. So the Fifth Doctor, he kind of comes off as a nice guy. Talk a little bit about Peter Davison as an actor. Peter Davison, he only did 3 seasons of Doctor Who. He was convinced at the time by Patrick Troughton, the gentleman who played the second Doctor, that he should only play 3 seasons so that he didn't get typecast. And when Peter Davison made that decision at the time, he was happy with it. However, it has been revealed nowadays, so later on, that Peter Davison nowadays regrets that decision. If he could go back in time, he would do it differently. He would probably play the Doctor for maybe 4 or 5 seasons instead of 3. So it's interesting to hear him talk about that in interviews, how he kind of regrets making the decision to only play those 3 seasons. And he has been quote-unquote active within the new Doctor Who. And when I say active, you gotta understand it's not like he's playing the 10th Doctor or anything weird like that. No, but sometimes you'll see him on set. His daughter was playing a character in one of the episodes, and then they had the special Caught Up in Time or something like that, where Peter Davison reprised his role as the 5th Doctor alongside the 10th Doctor for, I think it was like a 10-minute, really quick episode. I can't remember the name of it. It was like a children's special or something like that. I have it on my computer, but I just can't remember the exact details of it at the time. So Peter Davison is still involved in the show, and for the most part, people like him. If you look at some of the newer Doctors, for instance, the actor who portrayed the 10th Doctor, David Tennant, has said, when I grew up as a kid, the 5th Doctor was my Doctor. Peter Davison is who I identified as the Doctor. So a lot of people like Peter Davison. My personal take on it is he's kind of okay. I don't really like or dislike him as far as old school Doctor Who goes. I much prefer the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Doctor over the 5th, 6th, and 7th. And another interesting thing about the 5th Doctor is this is when the ratings of Doctor Who really started to take a dive. If you remember correctly, during the 4th Doctor's sort of foray as Doctor Who, the ratings were really going up. Towards the end of the 4th Doctor's reign, they were even breaking 16 million viewers, which is something that the new Doctor Who has never really done, if you look at the viewer numbers. But of course, nowadays you have different media besides television, obviously with what people watch in the episodes, so it doesn't really relate, I don't think, that well. But it's still interesting to know that during the 5th Doctor's time, the ratings were getting kind of bad. Sometimes they would plummet to as low as 6 million. And if you think about that, 6 million versus 16 million. That's a pretty big difference in viewership numbers. So yeah, a lot of people like the 5th Doctor, but if you look at it from a realistic standpoint, the show was starting to kind of go downhill. The scripts weren't as good as they used to be. The special effects were horrible. There's one episode in particular of the 5th Doctor, Time Flight, which is just atrocious. The special effects are horrible bad. We're talking as bad as they were during the 1st Doctor. Literally, it's a guy holding a model airplane with his hand or a stick and moving it across the screen. And we're supposed to believe that that's an airplane taking off. And it is so horrendously bad. Maybe they ran out of budget. Maybe there was budgeting problems. It was obvious that people writing the scripts didn't know what they were doing because the stories, most of them, just aren't that good. When you compare the 5th Doctor to previous Doctors, it just started falling apart in a lot of areas. And I think that's the big reason, personally, I think. I wasn't around in Britain at the time. 1982 to 1984, I was just a baby. I was born in 1981. I wasn't around at the time, so maybe I'm missing a few facts because I wasn't there when it happened. Another interesting problem with the 5th Doctor was companions. The 5th Doctor had some of the most annoying companions of all time. Adric, Tegan. Now don't get me wrong, the actress who played Tegan was smoking hot, and I'm all for that. But that was another problem I kind of had with the 5th Doctor, and I think a lot of people have had as well, is the companions were incredibly, horribly annoying. Their personalities were annoying. The lines of dialogue they were given were annoying and didn't make sense sometimes. Sometimes they did, but sometimes they didn't. And it's definitely noticeable as you watch the Fifth Doctor. They actually killed off Adric, which I think is hilarious. Spoilers! But when you look back at it and you look at the viewership numbers and you look at kind of what people have been saying, this is when things started to go downhill for Doctor Who. Things started to fall apart. But still, a lot of people like the Fifth Doctor. Moving on to recommendations, what episodes am I going to recommend? Well, I'm going to only recommend 4, because there's not a whole lot of episodes to recommend, because the Fifth Doctor only has 3 seasons. First recommendation is going to be The Visitation. This is one of the older Fifth Doctor stories. He has Nyssa, Tegan, and Adric as companions, and during the story he actually acquires a 4th companion temporarily. So it's just, there's companions all over the place. All kinds of crazy stuff is happening. The Visitation is a good episode, I think, overall. Kind of confronting aliens on Earth who are there, crash landed, but they're going to exterminate, blah, blah, blah. Pretty typical story, but it just seemed like it was fairly well done. The next episode I'm going to recommend is going to be a partial recommendation, and that's The Five Doctors. This is a pretty, as far as stories goes, it wasn't that great. I mean, it wasn't like really that amazing. The thing is that you've got all 5 of the Doctors, technically. And when I say technically, there was an issue with Tom Baker, where sort of at the last minute he decided to pull out, so they had to use stock footage from an old 4th Doctor episode to kind of get Tom Baker in, but he wasn't really interacting with the other Doctors. So when they say the 5 Doctors, yeah, it's kind of like the 4.5 Doctors. Another interesting thing is that the actor who had portrayed the first Doctor, William Hartnell, was deceased, because remember he died in the 70s. So they brought in another actor to portray the first Doctor, and I think he did a pretty good job. He didn't get it perfect, obviously, because he's not the same person, but I think overall he did a pretty good job. So I'm going to recommend The Five Doctors just because it's an anniversary episode. You see a lot of the Doctors interacting, and it's pretty cool to watch, but it's not the best episode of all time. But still, it's pretty cool to see all this interaction. They're back on Gallifrey, and, there's Cybermen, technically there's Daleks. They're dealing with Rassilon, and there's all this stuff, and the Master's there, and Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart's there. So it's pretty cool to see all this interaction between these various generations of the Doctor. Next one I'm going to recommend is Resurrection of the Daleks. This is a pretty good one, kind of following up with what happened with the Daleks during the era of the 4th Doctor. During the 4th Doctor's episodes, Davros was introduced as the creator or a sister or whatever of the Daleks, and so he's still there. And in Resurrection of the Daleks, it's Davros on a prison ship, an escort ship, something like that. You can term it however you want. And then the Daleks want him back. Doctor's got to stop him. And there's stuff going on Earth too. And the Doctor's in there, and it's a pretty good episode overall, especially how it deals with Tegan. This is the last episode that Tegan's in, so she was with the 5th Doctor almost the entirety of all his episodes, and it's pretty good for the most part. And then the last one I'm going to recommend is Frontios. I'm kind of recommending these a little bit out of order, because if I'm not mistaken, Frontios happened right before Resurrection of the Daleks. But I like Frontios because they're finally not on Earth for once, which is a relief. And they're out in outer space, and humanity has come so far, so far in the future. They've put a lot of miles between them and the Earth. What's going on? And of course, the Doctor, he says, "Well, I don't want to interfere," but then he's kind of forced to interfere. And there's some crazy stuff going on this planet: aliens, humans, how they're interacting, how the Doctor has to solve the problem. And it's actually a pretty interesting idea. The villains in this particular episode are kind of like a race of beetles that create series of hallways inside of planets that can use their magnetic manipulation powers to turn the entire planet into a spaceship. From a lore standpoint, from a what's going on, like this is kind of a cool idea with an alien species standpoint, and I think that's pretty good about Frontios. So overall, I'd recommend that. So those are my recommendations on the 5th Doctor, and like I said, the 5th Doctor, a lot of people like him. Overall, ratings were kind of going down. It's seasons 19 through 21, about 3 years, pretty good overall. I like the 5th Doctor. He's not in my top 3 favorites, but I think he's overall pretty good. This is Cold Turkey. Thanks for watching.